Hey everyone, welcome back to Northside Baseball. Ethan and Brandon here yet again to continue discussing everything going on with the Cubs. Today we've got an unfortunate bit of roster news, yet another pitcher injury, yet another good pitcher. In not that you ever want to see anyone injured, but a very important pitcher on the roster is injured again. That being Porter Hodge. Sort of one of these fill-in closers that's been sort of handling the job as Ryan Presley's working through his struggles. It is yet another oblique injury. Feels like everyone's oblique is just blowing up in Chicago this year.
Must be something in the water, man.
Ethan Roberts is coming back to replace him, which is nice because Ethan Roberts was having a nice season before he went on the injured list. He had a bad appearance before he got put on the injured list, but other than that, he was playing well, and he's been sort of a longtime member of the Cubs organization. But overall, it's obviously tough to lose Hodge. So just want to gather your thoughts, Ethan. And yeah.
You've heard me say this from the moment I've started at this company. What the heck is going on? I swear that every year I work for Northside Baseball. I go, maybe as we start the season, I go, all right, the injuries aren't that bad for our bullpen this year. It's gonna be okay. And then it's just another injury after another injury after another injury. And again, like we've said, it's a lot of oblique injuries. I will say, we could talk about Ethan Roberts in a sec, but what I will say that kind of gives me a little bit of hope in the sense of maybe not Porter Hodge, but I was reading an article about Shota Imanaga, our boy. We have to shout out our boy Shota Imanaga. And Craig Counsell was mentioning that it looks like that Shota Imanaga most likely will make his return in June, which will be
Mhm.
great, which will take, I think, a little bit of stress off of our starting bullpen. So that's some good news. But, back to Porter Hodge. It's a shame that we have another injury. But again, I'm excited to see what Ethan Roberts has to offer. Again, like you said, it wasn't the most, amazing um show in 2024, but there's always a redemption arc. What's your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I mean he's obviously he's a very talented arm. He's got electric stuff. He's definitely one of the highest strikeout guys, or at least has the potential to be one of the highest strikeout guys in the bullpen. And losing him for any amount of time right now is far from ideal. I think right now the closer situation is gonna look a little wonky. Presley's been pitching quite a bit better since he had that implosion in San Francisco a couple weeks ago, so that's good. Maybe he's ready, but to get a couple save opportunities again. Um, maybe Daniel Palencia might get a few save opportunities. Drew Pomeranz has been really nice, in some short stints this year, for the Cubs. So it's again, it's just one we've talked about this a lot, but it's just one of those things where, the Cubs made the trade for Kyle Tucker. They signed they signed Matthew Boyd and Colin Ray for the rotation. And it was really in the bullpen where it felt like they were pinching pennies. And it really felt like, it very clearly they could have used that like shutdown closer, or that shutdown reliever guy, whether it was Tanner Scott or Kirby Yates or any of these other guys that they were, reportedly, interested in negotiating with or trading for. And it's times like this when you lose someone like Porter Hodge, who wasn't having the best season. He had some up and downs, but he's one of the better arms just in terms of raw stuff and potential. Where you lose a guy like him, and now all of a sudden, it's just the domino effect where sure, Ethan Roberts is a solid reliever, but he's not a closer. He's not a guy that, in a close 3-2 game in the eighth or ninth inning, he's probably not the first guy out of the pen. So it's just really, again, a testament to the fact that the Cubs are a really good team this year, but they're very thin in the bullpen, and it's very clearly an area of need heading into the trade deadline in a couple months.
I will say, and again, this is a knock on wood kind of thing I'm going to say here. As of this recording, we are first in the National League, right? What I will say, and I said this a few months ago, and maybe I should bite my tongue, but I'm going to say it because I want to kind of end on a positive note here. What I said a few months ago when Javier Assad and Justin Steele initially got their injuries, right, was at least it's happening early on. So they can bounce back, by the time playoffs happen. And again, we're in first place right now. I would rather this happen now on May 20th of this recording rather than in October when we're in the playoffs, right? And I'm not saying I want to make the playoffs. Um, oblique strains will heal. I'm no doctor, but if you look up how long is an oblique strain going to take to heal, it usually takes a few weeks to maybe a month with rehab, right? And the Cubs have great, staff to help with injuries. So the one worry, and here I go back with a negative again. I'm being a negative Nelly. Here's the one negative I have with this. You can come back from an injury no issue. But what we saw last year with Justin Steele is that he came back from an injury and then not like a few weeks later, he went out again with like a hamstring injury. So the hope is that all these injuries kind of happen now, and then you return from them. Hopefully Shota and Javier and Porter and Justin all come back from these injuries, stay healthy, and do not return to the IL. And we have the healthiest baseball season of 2025 and beyond. That's my thoughts on this. What are your kind of thoughts, the ending thoughts here, Brandon?
Yeah, I think obviously you're right. I mean, if you were to pick and choose, you'd rather the injuries, come in waves earlier in the season. Obviously, that's not exactly how baseball works. I'm sure that there will be, injuries later in the year. It's just the nature of the sport. You hope that, that none of them are serious long-term injuries. But I will say that, again, I'm someone who routinely calls for the Cubs to hey, listen, you're going to have to make that trade at the trade deadline. You're going to have to make that external addition. But I will caution people who are in that same camp. You can't really you can't just create a market out of thin air. Yes, the Cubs need to make that trade very clearly. Unless Ryan Presley, goes he finds the fountain of youth from 5 years ago, the Cubs need another reliever. So it's really one of those situations where it needs to be patience because if the Cubs try to trade for a reliever right now, where there's not really a trade market, it's the middle of May. Most teams are still fancying themselves as at least fringe contenders. You're going to have to pay a ridiculous price for any reliever that can close out games. So it's one of those things where you just hope that guys get healthy. You hope that guys that you're going to give innings to when other guys aren't healthy are able to prove themselves, and that you can have the skeleton of a really solid bullpen going into the trade deadline so that when you make that trade for that closer or that late inning arm, that high leverage arm, then the rest of everything has already fallen in place. So I wouldn't expect to trade for at least another month. Probably not at least until the All-Star break, if we're being honest, just because of again, the cost will go down the longer the season progresses. But overall, it's just when you see something like this to Porter Hodge or any of these other high leverage relievers that the Cubs have, it just reminds you that hey, they are really lacking that shutdown guy, and clearly they're going to have to get a closer at some point.